shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and my name is Dave Robbins. I'm with End Time Ministries, and I want to welcome you to Thursday's edition of End of the Age. Now, you've heard it said that brainwashing is a bad thing. If I said, hey, today, everybody, I'm going to brainwash you, immediately you would think, whoa, now hold on a second, brainwash me? Well, I'm actually going to try to brainwash you today, but not in the way that you might think. I'm actually going to try to wash your brain. Because you've heard so much news lately about, or so much reports about fake news. And you get to the point where you almost don't know what to believe anymore. Some of the news sources that used to be so reliable, you realize that, oh my goodness, they've been pushing an agenda this whole time, and I really can't rely on anything that they say. And so, consequently, what I want to do today, because I'm going to talk about one of the biggest fake news stories that has been pushed over the last several decades, really, that I can think of, really. And so, that's what we're going to talk about today, and I'll tie it all in with the prophecies of the Bible. So let's start off like this. The Bible prophesies, many of you know, we've got new audiences coming on all the time, so we've kind of got to reiterate what we teach, but many of you will already know that the Bible prophesies that just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, there will be a world government, a global governing entity established in the earth. And really, in many ways, I've got several ways I could prove this. I could talk about the United Nations, the World Bank, International Criminal Court, all the international governing organizations. But I'm going to focus on one just here in a second. In many ways, this world government, it's already created and functioning, and it already has a grip somewhat on your life and my life. Now, today, I'm going to focus on just one of the many ways that the elite or liberal internationalist, whatever you want to call them, people who believe in a world government, and how these people are trying to establish, and at this point it doesn't have teeth, but it will very soon, according to Scripture, how they're trying to establish this global governing entity. Now, let's talk about fake news real quick, because it's just all over the news. That's kind of ironic, but it's all over the news right now, this fake news stories. They're coming out. We've all seen how the liberal news media has tried to discredit, slander, demonize President Donald Trump by publishing article after article, airing news broadcast after news broadcast, that he colluded with Russia to tamper with the 2016 election. Everybody out there, if you listen to the news at all, read the paper, whatever, you've seen articles on this. Well, of course, now it's coming to light that it's a total hoax and a simple lie. And you say, well, why? Why did they start this? Why the hoax? Why lie? Well, because there's a clear agenda behind it. It's an agenda by the liberal media to get rid of, or to make it so he's totally has no credibility, of President Donald Trump. And so this proves that there is nothing that the liberal entities, the liberal elitists, that they won't do to further their agenda. And the biggest agenda right now is a world government, world religion, all these different things. They're pushing these agendas. The ultimate goal is a world government. That's what they really want. And so they're doing all these things. If somebody doesn't fit into that mold, then they try to demonize them and to get rid of them, impeach them, whatever they have to do. They don't want that person in there because they're not going to go along with the system that's being set up, this world governing body. So Donald Trump comes along. He's against globalization and a world government, further reliance on the UN. He's wanting to build a wall. Well, they're totally against that. And so they tried to demonize him from the get-go. So they thought, well, hey, you know, the Russians colluded with Trump to throw the election, and now it's all become a hoax. But reliable news sources, well, I would say quote-unquote reliable news sources, have been reporting on this all along because they've got an agenda. And so remember the fake news stories. Remember that, and then consider this. There's nothing, the stories we've heard recently, these little fake news stories, those are nothing compared to the global warming, climate change scam, the hoax, the lie that is being pushed globally by elitists that want to control every aspect of your life. What you produce, what you consume, not just electricity, but what you consume food-wise, everything. They want to control every aspect of your life. An ultimate, true global government. So there's always, behind every hoax that these elitists push, there's always an agenda. So what's the ultimate goal of the global warming climate change agenda? Because believe me, they are pushing this. They've been pushing it for decades. There's been hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars spent on this. And they're not really changing anything. They're not really trying to change anything. They're trying to establish a world government. So the goal, at the end of the day, is a socialistic one world government. That's the reason for the hoax. Now, a former governor, I'll give you a couple quotes. Former governor of the state of Washington, Dixie Lee Ray. She really probably summed it up best when she said, the objective clearly enunciated by the leaders of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the whole goal of that is to bring about a change in the present system of independent nations. The United States signed a Declaration of Independence. So we're one of the independent nations she's talking about. She says that the future is to be a world government with central planning by the United Nations. Now there it is right there in plain English. A world government with central planning by the United Nations. Fear of the environmental crisis, whether real or not, is expected to lead to complete, total compliance. So she just lays it right out there and says, look, the goal of this is a UN-led world government, and whether this thing is real or not, global warming, which leads to climate change, whether it's real or not, it's expected to lead to compliance. So the goal right there, a world government. Now the Bible says, just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, there's going to be a world government established in the earth, and the Antichrist will eventually usurp authority over that world governing entity. Well, this is just one of the many ways they're trying to establish a world government in the earth. And they've been doing it for decades. This didn't start last year or two. This has been going on for decades now. And so we're coming to the culmination of this, and then a guy comes along, Donald Trump, and says, nah, we're going to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which is what they had worked for and worked for and worked for. He comes along and says, no. Well, now you know why they're trying to demonize the guy. Because he's totally against their plan. So they've got this agenda. It doesn't matter whether it's real news, fake news, whatever. We're going to try to get him out of power, make it so he's non-effective at all. Make him out to be a buffoon, demonize him. That's what they've been trying to do. That's one of the big reasons for this fake news going around about Donald Trump. So for decades now, global elitists have been spinning tales of an impending ice age or catastrophic global warming that's going to burn up the planet in an effort to keep all of us in a perpetual state of fear. But now that global cooling and global warming have been so easily disproven, I mean, the earth, think about it. Over the course of time, the earth has heated up and cooled down. The earth has a way of regulating itself. God's in control of all of it. But He made it so that the earth had a way with the oceans and different things. The earth has heated up and cooled down all throughout time. And so people have been reporting on these different things and saying, oh, but when they decided that they wanted to have a world government, they said, well, we've got to, they know that if they can get people scared enough that they'll give up freedoms in the name of protection and say, just do whatever you want to protect us, the government. And so they've been spinning the global warming and climate cooling lies, but they've been so easily disproven up to this point. Politicians and their on-staff scientists have resorted to promoting fear of man-made global warming, which leads to climate change. Now, as a result, they can blame every hurricane, every earthquake, every drought, every flood, snowstorm even, on human beings. And they say because human beings created this or are creating it, then we need more government, a big government. Or since it's global, since the country's borders don't control what air flows across and all of these different things, that we need a global governing entity to control the whole thing. Now, to give you a few more quotes, the New American provided us with a couple of quotes from the ranks of climate-wealthy industrialists, philanthropists, writers, politicians, and other sundry movers and shakers of society who would stop at nothing to push their agenda, whether it was real or not. Remember what Dixie Lee said. And I want to give you a couple of these quotes because I really want to drive this point home that whether it's real or not, they don't care about the climate. It's pushing this global governing agenda. Paul Watson, who was a co-founder of Greenpeace, stated that it doesn't really matter what is true. It only matters what people believe is true. The founder of Greenpeace. Then Jim Sibison, who was an environmental journalist and a former public relations official for the EPA, stated that we routinely wrote scare stories using scare tactics, and that we were out to whip the public into a frenzy about the environment. And then Daniel D. Botkin, he was an ecologist and professor emeritus in the Department of Ecology and Evolution and Marine Biology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He stated that the only way to get our society to truly change is to frighten people with the possibility of a catastrophe. So they've used scare tactics. If I can get you afraid enough, I can pretty much put on any regulation that I want to. I can impose that in the name of security. And that's the goal behind all of this. More government and a world government is the goal. So the goal of the global warming climate change hoax is world government, and anyone that doesn't want to participate, it infuriates these elitist or liberal internationalists that envision this world government as the last great hope for humanity. Now, the Washington Post reports just today that Angela Merkel, she's predicting a showdown with the U.S. over the climate, this climate hoax and people pulling out of it at the upcoming G20 summit. Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany vowed to defend the international climate agreement that Donald Trump, the Trump administration, just pulled out of. And without naming him, Angela Merkel appeared to lament President Trump's uncertainty about human-induced climate change And she stated, we can't and we won't wait until the last person on earth is convinced of the scientific evidence for climate change. So she's saying, regardless of whether Donald Trump believes this or not, he just needs to buy into it and let's get on with the program. What's the program? Global governance. She goes on to state that since the U.S. announced that it would exit the Paris Agreement, we cannot expect any easy talks in Hamburg. And she was referring to the Group of 20, the G20 summit, which is scheduled just this next week, July 7th, I think, through the 8th or 9th. And she said that the dissent is obvious and it would be dishonest to cover it up. One of her goals, Mrs. Merkel said, would be to send a clear signal for free markets and against isolationism, adding that whoever believes that the world's problems can be solved by isolationism and protectionism is making an enormous error. Well, to be honest, the Paris Climate Agreement was only signed by about every nation on earth in an effort to help reach the targets set forth in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And when she's talking about isolationism or protectionism, she's talking about somebody who's against a one world government, somebody who's trying to, an entity or a president that's trying to protect their own borders. People who believe in a world government are totally against that. It's called the process of globalization, doing away with the nation state and all of us creating a global state that answers to a global government. That's their goal. And that's the goal of the Sustainable Development Goals, the global warming, which leads to climate change hoax. So the Sustainable Development Goals, or part of the Agenda 2030, are a major effort towards global governments of every aspect of every person's life on the planet. None of us will be excluded if all of this stuff if they meet their goal. And that's what Donald Trump threw a wrench in when he pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement here just a couple weeks ago. And again, if you really look at the agenda of Angela Merkel, she and many other world leaders who believe in the establishment of a world government, when you boil it all down to its essence, they're simply infuriated that President Trump hasn't bought into their global warming, climate change hoax. He actually said on the campaign trail, it's a hoax. And he's actually right. It's not about the climate. They don't care about the climate. They want the world government. It's what it all boils down to. These elitists really, they could care less about that. They know full well that it is a non-issue. The earth it heats up, cools down. It has since the beginning of time. Climate change, the climate was, I think in Dallas here yesterday, it was in the 80s. I think it's going to be in the 90s today. It's going to be different tomorrow. The climate changes every day. And guess who controls it every single day? God. There's nothing we can do about it. God controls the climate. So why don't we let Him do His job? He's been doing it a lot longer than any of us listening to me have been here. I think He does a pretty good job. But yet, these globalists, these people who are liberal international, they believe in the world government, they've taken God out of the equation. They're what you refer to as humanists. They believe in humanistic or human solutions to these problems, or this non-issue. They believe that there should be human solutions rather than, well, God controls everything. They've taken God out of it. That's what humanism is. It's non-reliance on God. And these are the people that are wanting to establish a world government. And so with Angela Merkel, that's why she's talking about isolationism and protectionism. They are upset because Donald Trump does not want to play ball, if you will, with the rest of the world. Like really several of the previous administrations, they've went right along with the program. And that is what they will really be focused on coming up at the G20 summit. But the fact of the matter is, folks, let's call a spade a spade. The global warming climate change scam, the global warming climate change hoax or the lie, the global warming climate change fake news. It's one of the largest fake news stories that's ever been perpetrated on the planet, has been fabricated to scare everyone. I just gave you some quotes of leading scientists and different people, journalists, that it's been fabricated to scare everyone into accepting more control by a world government. And the problem is, it's fake news. It's a lie. And I found an article from, I read an article, I read hundreds of articles on this stuff, but Investors Business Daily ran an interesting piece proclaiming what a lot of us have really been thinking. The global warming, climate change, it's the imminent crisis that they built up that never arrives because it's a hoax. I mean, it's summer 2017 and the Arctic, think about this, the Arctic was supposed to be ice-free by now. Hurricanes were supposed to be more frequent and more deadly, and sea levels were supposed to be rising alarmingly and coming clear into Indiana from one way and to Iowa from the west coast. Why isn't it? It's not happening. When's it ever going to arrive like they say it is? It's not going to arrive. The Bible says as long as the earth remains, that there will be all of the seasons. There's going to be a winter. There's going to be hot and cold times. There's going to be harvesting times. There's going to be planting times. It's not going to happen, everybody. It's a hoax. They're trying to push a world government. That's the goal. Now remember, I told you I was going to try to brainwash you today, or to wash your brain. Because if you just read the news, you will get inundated with these stories of that because of climate change, that we might have less hailstorms, but when we do have a hailstorm, the hail balls are going to be a lot bigger than they used to be. That's total speculation, everyone. Total speculation. There's no way they could prove that. They're saying 20, 30, 40 years from now, the hail balls are going to be bigger than they have in the past. There's no way to know that. So at the end of the day, the climate change that they say is coming, and we're going to heat the planet up to the point where it burns up and all these sea level rises, where's it at? Al Gore swore in his 2006 movie, science fiction movie, I should say, An Inconvenient Truth, that within a decade, now this is 2006, we're 11 years removed from that, that within a decade there would be a true planetary emergency. The only planetary emergency that I can see is ISIS and different things like that. And so Al Gore, in the movie's introduction, stated, unless we act boldly and quickly to deal with the underlying causes of global warming, our world will undergo a string of terrible catastrophes. Now, this was 11 years ago, everyone. Where are those at? They were claiming that the sea levels would rise and almost engulf America, and that we would all have to head to high ground. Have you guys noticed that happening? I mean, maybe I missed something. I mean, our research team here is in world, local, and national news all day long, every day. I'm not seeing that happening. So if you find some articles like that where the Atlantic Ocean has risen to the point where it's coming in to Ohio and Indiana, I would love to see articles like that. Or maybe that the Pacific Ocean has came up to the point where it's coming to the middle of Kansas. If you find an article like that, please send it to me. drobbins@endtime.com. I'd love to see that. Now, Popular Science claims that researchers are saying that we have 3 years left to act on climate change before it gets too late. If we want a smooth transition into a sustainable future, we need to act fast. There they are trying to sell the Sustainable Development Goals again. The article, spearheaded by Christina Figueres, who was an architect of the process that led to the Paris Climate Agreement and now vice chair of the government, the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, She said that we only have 3 years to act. We have until 2020, and there's authors who include a number of researchers, state and local government officials, including the governor of California, and heads of climate change focused organizations. Before achieving the goals laid out in the Paris Climate Agreement, it became almost impossible. At that point, the actions that we'd have to undertake would be drastic. 2020 is a hard deadline, according to them, and there's no turning back if we don't bend the emissions curve within 3 years. Now, the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation and a signatory on the article stated that there are no jobs on a dead planet. So you got to sit back and look at this and go, wow, I mean, these people are trying to scare us to death. Now now they've pushed it out to 2020 and said, look, we don't do it by 2020, we could have a dead planet. And there's not going to be any jobs for anybody on a dead planet if we don't curb these emissions right now, immediately, starting today. But folks, I just want to make sure that you understand, it's a hoax. Why hasn't it happened up until now? I mean, have you looked at pictures recently of the North and South Pole? They're still covered in ice. And all of the snow on Kilimanjaro has not melted off. And I mean, think about it. Let's just think logically. It's a hoax. There's an agenda behind it. It's fake news. And so just like all the other minute fake news stories that have been out there, this is one of the biggest one that's ever been pushed. And it's been pushed for decades. And they're not giving up on it. They started preaching originally about global warming, global warming, global warming. When that was disproved, then they went to climate change. And now they can blame every climate act on global warming and climate change.
From Here to Armageddon, a new exciting 8-lesson series to share with your friends and family. Order yours right away.
Answering many questions like how far are we from the Battle of Armageddon? What will happen between now and then? Where are we on the timeline? Your questions answered in this exciting 8-lesson series, From Here to Armageddon.
Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-END-TIME, 1-800-363-8463. Order yours right away.
Today I have some exciting news to share with you. You can now become a magazine subscriber for life. You will receive first-class benefits that will include a lifetime membership to End Time Magazine, as well as an unlimited access to the digital version of the magazine. You will also receive 20% off of all future orders at endtime.com, well, at least till the rapture happens. Never worry about missing one important issue or forgetting to renew. You can rest assured when something happens in the news pertaining to Bible prophecy, you will be informed with the most recent cutting-edge material available. End Time Magazine has been the forefront of End Time Ministries since the beginning, and we would love to join with you in this first ever opportunity of becoming a magazine subscriber for life. Join today by calling 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or go to endtime.com.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also...
You know, wouldn't it be nice in the day of fake news that there would be some websites, reliable news sources that you could go to help you to say, man, once I read this, this is going to happen, or this is really what the story meant. Wouldn't it be nice to have a website or websites that you could go to? Well, one that I know you can go to, obviously endtime.com, ENDTIME.com. For a lot of you new listeners out there, End of the Age is the name of our radio and television program, but the name of our ministry here, Irvin Baxter is the CEO of that and the president, and the name of the ministry is End Time Ministries. Well, you can go to endtime.com, ENDTIME.com. We put news articles up every day from reliable news sources that will talk to you about current events showing how prophecy written 2,000 to 2,500 years ago has come to pass. And also, I have a list of news sources that I use. Now, I will tell you some of them are liberal, but sometimes they'll report on something that's prophetic, and they don't even really have a clue what they're reporting on. They're just reporting on something that's going on, and Irvin or myself or one of our other research people will look at it and go, oh my gosh, look at what's going on here. This is a direct fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Sometimes we'll post articles like that up there that are not fake news. I've tested them against other news sources and different things and found out the information was correct. So I have a list of news sources that we use to get our information from, and then of course we've got to look at that and compare it to other reliable sources. If you'd like that, you could email me, drobbins@endtime.com, and I'd be happy to send you a list of different news sources that we use. And it's not a conclusive list. Sometimes I'll go off and just to Google News and type in Mark of the Beast or the chip in the hand or something like that. But I do have a list of that if you'd like some news sources that you could go to. Jerusalem Post, Debka File, different things like that. But so you say, well, man, this global warming climate change hoax, I've read hundreds of articles on this. How do I know that it's not true? Because supposedly these reliable news sources, they're talking about it all the time, and they claim to have scientists and these world-renowned scientists and journalists and different people, global leaders that have all been saying that this is true. How do we know it's not true? Simple. It's not coming to pass. If all of these things, they've made predictions over the years, for decades now, and none of the predictions that you could test have come to pass. None of them. So the New American, it was kind of neat because the New American published an article that really cuts through all the fake news and reveals the truth. So honestly, does anyone listening to me, do you have time for fake news? I mean, you don't read the news just because you want something else to do. You want the news because you want to know what's the truth. And if that's the case, if I find a news source that I know is the truth and they report on the truth and they have credibility and they've got character, then I will keep going back there because I know these guys are telling me the truth. Well, so you're saying to me, you would say back to me if we were talking right now, no, Dave, I don't have time for fake news. So the fact of the matter is, where is the evidence? That's what we got to look at. For decades now, they've been spinning these scare tactics. Where's the evidence that anthropogenic or human-induced global warming leads to climate change, which then produces all kinds of weather catastrophes? If there were evidence for this, I'd buy into it. Because I would say, you know what, wow, 5 years ago they predicted this, and this is happening. 10 years ago they predicted this, and look what's going on right now. But the fact of the matter is, there are not any that are testable predictions that have come to pass. So, folks, according to the New American, climate alarmists have been wrong about virtually everything. So, not surprisingly, really, champions of this Paris Accord that Donald Trump pulled us out of, they're warning that the U.S. withdrawal is going to lead to global environmental devastation. Now remember, they've tried these scare tactics forever. They're not happening. But so the question is, are they correct? In order to answer this question, we've got to look at the past predictions of climate doomsayers and to compare their dire warnings with what has actually happened, because that's going to be the telltale sign. If they've been spot on every time, I'd start listening to this stuff. But when you really look back at it and none of it has come to pass, then you got to say, well, hold on a second. And look throughout history. It's simply a hoax. So what I'm going to do throughout the rest of the program is give you a few instances, I mean just a few of the many, of where they gave a prediction and it was wrong. And I'm talking about major things. So go all the way back to 1975 with me, if you will, to a Newsweek article, and it was entitled "The Cooling World." And it claimed that the Earth's temperature had been plunging for decades due to humanity's activities, and it opened like this. And I quote, "There are ominous signs that the Earth's weather patterns have begun to change dramatically, and that these changes may portend a drastic decline in food production." Now remember, they're talking about the cooling down of the Earth, and that it would result in a drastic decline in food production, with serious political implications for just about every nation on Earth. Well, imagine reading this in Newsweek in 1975. You would think, oh my, man, the Earth's fixing to freeze. We're going into another ice age. Well, the article goes on to say the drop in the food output could begin quite soon, perhaps only 10 years from now. This was 1975. I graduated high school in 1986. I didn't see a food shortage. And it goes on to say the regions destined to feel its impact are the great wheat-producing lands of Canada and the USSR in the north, along with a number of marginally self-sufficient tropical areas, parts of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indochina, and Indonesia, where the growing season is dependent upon the rains brought on by the monsoon. The evidence in support of these predictions has now begun to accumulate so massively that meteorologists are hard-pressed to keep up with it. In England, farmers have seen their growing season decline by about 2 weeks since 1950, with a resulting overall loss in grain production estimated up to 100,000 tons annually. The article actually quotes dire statistics from the National Academy of Sciences, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Center for Climate and Environmental Assessment, Columbia University, and the University of Wisconsin at Madison to indicate how dire the global cooling was and would be. And remember, this is 75. Experts suggested grandiose schemes to alleviate the problems, including melting the Arctic ice cap by covering it with black soot or diverting Arctic rivers. And it added the longer the planners delay, because they wanted to get things done now. The longer that planners delay, the more difficult they'll find it to cope with climatic change once the results become grim reality. Let me ask you a question. Does this sound familiar? I just read an article that said, folks, we've got 3 years left. 2020 is our deadline. So back then it was global cooling. Now it's global warming. So it sounds familiar. We've got deadlines. We've got to get these things done. Except the climate change alarmists back then were warning against global cooling. So now they flip-flop. That climate scare didn't work. Let's try something else. So for decades, climate alarmists have been warning that without the United Nations, the global climate regime to control human activity, alleged man-made climate change will bring the wrath of Mother Earth down upon humanity. They did it again from November 30th to December 11th in 2015 at the Paris the Paris Summit on Climate Change, and they warned yet again that it is the last chance to save humanity from itself. But climate alarmists have a long history of forecasting disasters. Many of you have read about these things for years, and they've been wrong about everything. There's no evidence. So, in fact, stretching back decades, virtually every alarmist prediction that was testable has been proven, really for them, embarrassingly wrong. To get a real sense of one of the great fake news hoaxes of all time, I want you to listen to a few of those discredited claims and pay close attention to the scare tactic being used to sell the hoax. Number one, a new ice age and worldwide starvation. Remember, back in the 60s and 70s, the top mainstream media outlets such as Newsweek, which I just mentioned, it hyped the imminent global cooling apocalypse. Even as late as the early 80s, prominent voices still warned of potential doomsday scenarios owing to man-made global cooling, ranging from mass starvation caused by cooling-induced crop failures to another full-blown ice age that would kill most all of mankind. Now think about living back then. Some of you may have read these stories and thought, oh my goodness, we're going to have another ice age. It was all a scare tactic. Never happened. But they were trying to get more regulation pushed through. Now, among the top global cooling theorists were President Obama's science czar, John Holdren, and Paul Ehrlich, the author of The Population Bomb, which predicted mass starvation worldwide. In the 1971 textbook Global Ecology, the duo warned that overpopulation and pollution would produce a new ice age, claiming that human activities are said to be responsible for the then world cooling trend. And this was really huge because this went on for decades, but it never come to pass. It was fake. They claimed that jet exhaust and man-made changes in the reflectivity of the Earth's surface through urbanization, deforestation, and the enlargement of deserts as the potential triggers for this new ice age. They worried that the man-made cooling might produce an outward slumping in the Antarctic ice cap and generate a tidal wave of proportions unprecedented in recorded history. Holdren predicted that 1 billion people would die in carbon dioxide-induced famines as part of a new ice age, get this, by the year 2020. Now they're saying we've got 2020 to stop global warming. They've completely flip-flopped now. And a lot of people have bought into this. So you see how they're back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, they were spinning global cooling, global cooling, global cooling. It never came to fruition. It's all a hoax to push more regulation, bigger government, and the eventual global government that they hope to achieve in just the next few years.
Most people have dreamed of someday walking on the ground where Jesus walked over 2,000 years ago. You don't have to wait any longer. Make this the year for your life-changing experience. This is your official invitation to join Judy and me for our 2017 Fall End Time Prophecy Tour. The trip of a lifetime is a severe understatement. If you could travel to any place on earth, your first choice should definitely be the Holy Land. There is simply no other place like it. Call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 for more information. Ask to speak to Holly or Jana about the tour.
So there are many things, many predictions that didn't come to pass that I could go through. I've talked about global warming, which obviously we're actually in a kind of a plateau. We're kind of just sitting still right now, and so I've talked about global warming. I've talked about global cooling, and they've actually talked about the ending of snowstorms, which we know we've had some huge snowstorms over the last several years. And they also talked about the melting ice caps. Go look at the Google Earth right now. Look at our ice caps. And really another area, let's talk about this for a second. Another area where warmist predictions have really proven totally incorrect concern the amount of ice at the Earth's North and South Pole. They predicted a complete melting of the Arctic ice cap in summers that should have already happened, and either claimed that the Antarctic ice was melting rapidly. As far as the Antarctic is concerned, in 2007, the UN IPCC claimed the ice sheets of Antarctica there are very likely shrinking. The UN also claimed that there was evidence of accelerated loss in 2005. And then in 2013, the UN doubled down on its false claim, claiming even greater sea level rises attributed to the melting in Antarctica. The contribution of, they say, Antarctic ice sheets has increased since the early 90s, partly from increased overflow induced by warming of the immediate adjacent oceans. The reality was exactly the opposite of that. In a statement released in October, NASA dropped the equivalent of a nuclear bomb on the UN's climate alarm, the alarmism machine, noting that the ice across Antarctica has been growing rapidly for decades. So these people they're just throwing stuff out there, just hoping to scare people and saying, well, Antarctica, the ice is melting and it's causing the sea levels to rise. NASA comes along and says, no, it's actually the opposite of that, that Antarctica has been getting bigger. Now imagine if you were paid by the United Nations, you were a scientist, and you were paid to spin these tales because they would fund your research only if you spun what they wanted you to say. Imagine the egg that you would have on your face if NASA come along and says, no, everything you guys just put in your annual reports about the Antarctic ice, that's the actual opposite of what's really happening. NASA said only that its new study on Arctic ice challenges the conclusion of the IPCC. In fact, the UN could not have been more wrong. Rather than melting ice in the southern hemisphere contributing to sea level rise, as claimed by the United Nations, ice in Antarctica has been expanding. And the growing ice is responsible for, get this, reducing sea levels by about 0.23 millimeters annually. You say, well, hold on a minute. Al Gore, who put out this book, the movie An Inconvenient Truth, all the way back in 2006, he was saying that in 10, 15 years, the earth as we know it would cease to exist, sea levels would rise, total cities would be consumed, the people would have to move to high ground, all because of global warming, which lead to climate change. But yet now, NASA is saying, no, that's actually not happening. It's actually, the Arctic is actually expanding. Sea levels are going down by about 0.23 millimeters annually. The UN's inaccurate Antarctic claims were illustrated really most comically when a ship full of alarmists seeking to study global warming were trapped in a record Antarctic sea ice in the summer of 2013 and had to be rescued by ships burning massive amounts of fossil fuels. And in the Northern Hemisphere, alarmists have fared no better. In 2007, 2008, and 2009, Al Gore, who really has made a fortune pushing warmist ideologies, publicly warned that the North Pole would be ice-free in the summer by around 2013 due to human-induced global warming. He stated that the North Polar ice cap is falling off a cliff. It could be completely gone in the summer in as little as 7 years, or 2013. Well, contrary to Gore's predictions, satellite data showed that Arctic ice volume in the summer of 2013 had actually expanded, get this, more than 50% over 2012 levels. In fact, during October 2013, sea ice levels grew at the fastest pace since records began in 1979. In 2014, the Arctic ice cap, apparently oblivious to Gore's predictions, continued its phenomenal rebound, leaving alarmists struggling for explanations. So any of these things that they said, these predictions that said, hey, these cataclysmic events are going to happen because of global cooling, global warming, none of it's really happened. These catastrophes haven't showed up. There have been tornadoes, there have been droughts, there have been hurricanes. All of these different things have happened since the beginning of time. So, you say, well, where's the global warming climate change? Folks, remember, I'm washing your brain today. It's a hoax. There's a lot of fake news going on out there, but I want to know the truth. The Bible says, you shall know the truth will set you free. I want to know the truth. I know that you want to know the truth. These people there's so much evidence that it's all false. They claim that there would be increased storms, increased drought, and sea level rises. The ice sheets have not cooperated, obviously, with the warmists, and neither have any of the other weather-related phenomena. Mass migrations owing to sea level rise. They would say the sea levels are going to rise, come into your country, and there's going to be mass migrations into other countries. There's mass migration, but there's mass refugees going around everywhere, but it's not because of sea level rise. On June 30, all the way back in 1989, the Associated Press ran an article headlined, "The UN Official Predicts Disaster." He says the greenhouse effect could wipe some nations off the map. In the piece, the director of the UN Environmental Programs of New York office was quoted as claiming that entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if global warming is not reversed by what year? The year 2000. He also predicted coastal flooding and crop failures that would create an exodus of eco refugees threatening political chaos. Well, of course, 2000 came and 2000 went. And none of those things actually happened. But that didn't stop the warnings. They're still happening today. And just the article I just read from Popular Science, we've got 3 years left. 2020 is our deadline. Then there are claims about drought. Some UN alarmists have even predicted that Americans would become climate refugees, that we'd have to leave America, using imagery that may be familiar to those who suffered through the infamous Dust Bowl and the drought in the 1930s. Prominent Princeton professor and lead UN IPCC author Michael Oppenheimer, he was one of the ones, and he made some dramatic predictions in 1990. By 1995, he said that the greenhouse effect would be desolating the heartlands of North America and Eurasia with horrific drought, causing crop failures and food. By 1996, he added that the Plate River of Nebraska would be completely dry, while a continent-wide black blizzard of prairie topsoil will stop traffic on interstates, strip paint from houses, and shut down computers. Well, of course, that didn't happen. But when he was confronted on his predictions, Oppenheimer, who also served as Al Gore's advisor, he refused to apologize. He said, well, actually, even though none of his predictions happened, he said, on the whole, I would stand by these predictions. He said, hold on, not predictions, scenarios, as having, at least in a general way, actually come true. Actually, none of them came true. And he claimed that there's been extensive drought, devastating drought, and in significant parts of the world. The fraction of the world that's in drought has increased over that period. Well, unfortunately for Oppenheimer, even his fellow alarmists debunked that claim in 2012 in a study for Nature, pointing out that there's been little change in global drought over the past 60 years. So countless other claims of human-induced global warming, the doom affecting humans, have also been debunked. Wildfires produced by global warming. And for instance, the wildfires were supposed to be raging around the world. And yet, as Forbes magazine pointed out recently, the number of wildfires has plummeted 15% since 1950. And that's according to the National Academy of Sciences. That trend is likely to continue for decades. Hurricanes and tornadoes, which alarmists assured were going to get more extreme and more frequent, and it probably would have been hard for experts to be more wrong. When 2014 hurricane season started, it will have been, it was 3,000 and some days since a Category 3 storm made landfall in the U.S. It shattered the records for the longest stretch between U.S. intense hurricanes all the way back since 1900. And so you see what's going on with this climate change hoax. Now, I could go through, I've got a list as long as your arm of climate predictions that have never, the ones that could be tested, they didn't come to pass. They turned out to be complete hoaxes. So again, before the program ends, I just want to make sure you understand that the goal behind the global warming climate change hoax, which was really in the 60s, 70s, early and 80s, was global cooling. Now it's global warming, which leads to climate change. The reason behind all of these hoaxes and these failed predictions is so that they can create a world government. That's the goal at the end of the day. Is it fake news? It's one of the largest fake news sets of stories that have ever ran. And what they want to do is to scare you into the point, to scare you so bad and to keep you in constant fear. That's why they went from global warming to climate change. Because with global warming, if the earth didn't heat up, nobody was scared anymore. So they said, well, we're going to start calling it climate change now. So every tornado that happens, every hurricane, every time it goes 2 or 3 weeks without raining and there might be a little bit of a drought, anything like that, any climate catastrophe, an earthquake, they can say, oh, climate change. We're causing that by the amount of carbon emissions that we're putting off. And so we need to regulate you, regulate. And those regulations are coming down from on high. The Sustainable Development Goals that every nation adopted, including President Obama in 2015. He signed the United States onto that. And then a couple months later, that's what led to the Paris Climate Agreement, which Donald Trump just pulled us out of. And that's why these elitists, these global warming propagandists, these people that believe in a world government, they're spinning these tales to try to keep you scared enough so they can regulate you and eventually have us all answer to a world government. And it's the same world government prophesied to be in power in the end time just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ.
End of the Age is a production of End Time Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. End Time Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.